The moment I saw Chris Nineham, the luminary who has marshalled anti-war protests in London for 25 whole years, a quarter of a century, when I saw him on the ground, pulled to the ground by London's finest metropolitan police officers, I knew immediately that Britain wasn't as free as it used to be. Because in the beginning of the Stop the War Coalition, I was one of its leaders. I marched at the head of countless demonstrations. Hardly a litter offence was committed when we had millions of people on the streets. No window was broken, no person assaulted. These were the most peaceful mass movement marches that I could ever imagine. And I'm no longer associated with the Stop the War Coalition, but of course I continue to support their efforts to stop the wars. And when I saw Chris Nineham, the man in charge of these demonstrations, smashed to the ground, I felt a very troubled feeling in my stomach. Made even worse as dozens, scores, maybe more than 100 activists from Saturday's march against genocide in Gaza were reportedly thrown into cells under arrest. And then I learned that Nineham himself had been arrested. He's now been released and has been bailed. And the cockamamie theory is that a group of 70-plus-year-olds smashed their way through police lines to lay flowers where they wanted to lay them, but the police had sought to preclude it. This is all a lie, as video evidence attests. Not only did they smash through no police line, it would be a parlous police line that could be smashed through by septuagenarian pacifists. After all, they were invited through by the police officers, and the video attests to it. I'm not making too much of this issue, except it goes to the issue of freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. I feel sure of one thing. It is that the decision to take these extraordinary measures was not made by the Metropolitan Police. In my experience, the police like to avoid conflict, especially with septuagenarian pacifists. They were ordered to take the measures they did by the British government, the worst British government in my memory, and my memory is a long one. A government which has taken away freedoms, given away our money, and is likely, if not stopped, to introduce a kind of tyranny to the United Kingdom. And up with that, we will not put. It might happen in the end. We are not, after all, enough millions to change the government, but we certainly will not go quietly into that good night. Because our grandfathers, our fathers, and even, in the audience tonight, some of us fought, and many died, gave their blood, gave their limbs, gave their psychological health to fight and defeat tyranny. And we will not allow our country to become one like the countries that we defeated in the Second World War. We may visit tyranny on other countries, indeed we very definitely do and have, but we will not allow tyranny in our own country. So if the police are forced by the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, to take these matters further, then there will be trouble in the land. And it's not trouble that we have sought. We, those who fought against genocide, who fought against our country's involvement in the genocide in Gaza, are not the criminals in this picture, and we will not be treated like them. Turning to Donald Trump, he's back. In a matter of hours, he will be again the President of the United States. Speaking personally, I'm not overjoyed that he is again the President of the United States, but I am overjoyed that Kamala Harris isn't. And I feel amply vindicated in that view by the events of the last hours and days. Already the incoming president, not yet in office, not a chicken McNugget has landed on the presidential desk in the Oval Office yet, but the ceasefire that he promised the voters of Michigan he would make sure happened before he took office has now taken effect. And the sight of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, many of them women and children, exultant in the streets, the sight of the Palestinian resistance who have endured an onslaught of almost unprecedented proportions in a territory so small, are still armed and ready. Don't take my word for that, take Anthony Blinken's word. Blinken, the real president of the United States over the last period, said that the Palestinian resistance were as strong today as they were at the beginning of the onslaught. The only thing that has changed is that Gaza now has more amputated children than any cohort of children ever in the history of humankind. The only change that there has been is that well over 300 Palestinian journalists and photographers have been deliberately murdered by a Western allied country, armed, financed and covered for diplomatically by your government and by mine, almost certainly. The only thing that has changed is that hundreds of thousands of people have been murdered or maimed. Dr. Abu Sitta, the respected British surgeon who served at least 2 stints in Gaza during this emergency, says that 16% of the population of Gaza has been murdered in less than 16 months. That counts as a genocide, you know. Whatever Keir Starmer, the famous international lawyer, says, that is a genocide, which is the attempted annihilation of all or a part of a group of people, not for anything that they have done, but because of who they are. This genocide is, I believe, a Holocaust deliberately engendered and supported by your government and mine. It will never be forgotten. The events of the last 16 months have changed all of us. Surely they have changed all of us. As I've said many times, if the butchery of Auschwitz and Treblinka had been live streamed, it would not have looked all that different to what we have seen live streamed over the last 16 months. All is changed utterly, and a terrible beauty is born. That beauty is the absolute rejection of Israel's claim to be a democracy, the only democracy, of Israel's claim to be people like us, of Israel's claim to be a Western ally which just happened to find itself in the Eastern world. It has died. Israel has died. Not yet physically, not yet organically, although that must be the most likely long-term outcome of the events we have just lived through, but died in the hearts and the minds of the people of the world. And it's now a thing of shame to have been a supporter of that genocide. You can see it written all over their faces. You can see it in their posts on social media. You can see it in that sinking feeling that they have, that they killed all those people, spilled such an ocean of blood, and nothing was achieved. The agreement that has been reached and today is now being implemented could have been reached at any time in the last 16 months. It is identical in character to the resistance proposals that were consistently rejected and blocked, and for which President Biden and President Blinken never once seriously pushed. The ceasefire may not last. Most ceasefires with the settler state government in Tel Aviv don't last. May last only a day or a week or a month. But at least for that day, for that week, for that month, Palestinian women will not have the risk of being cut down with razor-sharp steel, sheets of flying glass, consumed in fire and hell, unleashed by Western airplanes, supplied by the United States, targeted by the reconnaissance flights of the United Kingdom and explained away by Western journalists and by Western heads of state and government. At least for that day, week, month. Some food will arrive in Gaza, some medicine. There are no hospitals in which to treat people, so tent hospitals, field hospitals, will now have to rapidly be produced. And I believe that such is the goodwill now around the world and the mass of the population of the world that the effort to relieve the suffering of the people of Gaza will be on an unprecedented scale. The issue then will be what happens next. Well, that will in part be decided by which Donald Trump turns up. If it's the Donald Trump that was on the stump in Michigan, in Dearborn, on the eve of the election, it will be a settlement which brings at least a modicum of justice. If it's the Donald Trump posing beside Miriam Adelson, taking the shekels from the State of Israel's biggest and richest supporters in the United States, it will not. We'll discuss with a man who knows a thing or two about that in just a few minutes. And it's to him and to the events in which he was central that I wish to turn. Sam Husseini is not just an independent journalist. He's one who made it somehow into the belly of the beast. It's him that was there week after week after week, sometimes vainly, but sometimes very successfully, asking questions of the talking heads put up by Joe Biden about the injustices of the Middle East and, in particular, the suffering of the Palestinian people. Sam Husseini had long ago earned the respect, the admiration, and the love of many hundreds of millions of people around the world. He was already a big journalist. Until this week, when in a scene reminiscent of a Munich beer hall circa 1933, with a dissident voice being raised, Sam was dragged by thugs, organized by Miller, the smirking mouthpiece who smirked his way through a genocide. He was not just ordered out of a press conference, he was dragged out in a scene that could well have come from Hitler's Germany. He's joining us tonight to discuss what happened to him. But from what we saw, and what we saw on the streets of London yesterday, about which I have already spoken, I don't know about the slogan, "Make America Great Again." I'm not sure it was ever great. I certainly don't advance the slogan, "Make Britain Great Again," because I'm not sure when it was ever great. But one thing is for sure, both the United States and the United Kingdom are not as free as they used to be, and even in recent times. In modern times, no former leader of the Labour Party has ever been summoned to a police station to be interviewed under caution as a result of a peaceful march against genocide. In modern times, no American journalist has been treated in the way that Sam Husseini and his friend Max Blumenthal, who also very bravely bearded Blinken at that press conference in the last couple of days. Our rights to speak freely, our rights to express ourselves using the technology that is now available to us, our rights to march, our rights to assemble, our rights to assert our rights have never been under greater threat. Such that an app viewed mainly in the past by people who like dancing girls or dancing boys was actually, in this sea of troubles in the world, occupied presidential time to ban it. I refer, of course, to TikTok. No disrespect to TikTok, we're broadcasting live on it right now. And I myself have millions of views on it. But it would not be the thing I would settle down in bed at night and turn to. It was mainly inhabited, though not at all exclusively, by young people who liked young music and young dance moves. But it committed one serious blunder. Not being Chinese, this is a canard. TikTok was not banned because it was Chinese. It had always been Chinese. It was banned in the last year. It was banned by law change and by an absence of a presidential veto, presidential executive order to stop it, for one reason only. On TikTok could be found the truth of what was happening to Gaza. Now, they already knew that you and me knew the truth. They already knew that you and me were watching the videos on Twitter, most usually. But they could not accept that the truth would be seen by tens, scores of millions of young people in America, because that was contributing to the most important outcome of the last 16 months, namely the sea change in the United States in the national attitude to Israel. TikTok was banned, not because it was Chinese, but because there you could find the truth about what was happening in Gaza. And therefore, it may historically be seen as the moment of overreach by the Israel lobby in the United States. It's one thing to algorithmically strangle the likes of me. It's one thing to refuse someone the right to enter the United States on a speaking tour. It's another thing to alienate young people in their scores of millions by telling them they could not view an app that they had fallen in love with. And that's why Donald Trump's ace card was played today. Before even coming into office, he told TikTok they should continue publishing and that he would make sure that a negotiation took place which led to the securing of America's interests and kept the app open. There will be much consternation, much grinding of teeth and rending of garments in the Israel lobby this evening. They have suffered a major defeat over TikTok. But they need to suffer many more defeats. And that brings us back to Donald Trump. He has spoken already with President Xi and with President Putin. He plans a powwow with both of them. He started, he says, in the way that he means to go on. The whole world must earnestly hope that that is so. Sam Hosseini, up right after the break. Stay tuned.